Did you know that your tongue is not just one muscle, but actually made up of 8 muscles? And these 8 muscles together are incredibly strong. Now, they're not as strong as, say, like your glutes or your heart, but they're still very strong and have a big impact on your singing. Welcome back to Singing Tips with LJD Studios, where we talk about singing in ways you can actually understand. Today, we're talking about your tongue, its role in singing, how to identify tension, and how to get rid of it. But before we get into it, if you haven't already, make sure you download my free guide, The Three-Tiered Approach to Becoming a Better Singer. And also stay tuned for my membership that's launching soon and ways that you can get access to that for free before I start charging for it. You'll get direct feedback from me on your singing, plus access to an online library of all of my favorite vocal exercises so that you can learn how to sing without all the complications. So stay tuned for that as well. But in the meantime, click the link in the description. Make sure you get that free guide. You guys probably already know this, but everything in the body is interconnected, some things more closely than others. Let's just keep this simple and say the connection between your tongue and your larynx is very close. Inside of your larynx are your vocal cords, so any tension in your larynx is going to inhibit your ability to put your vocal cords into the configuration or setting they need to be in to produce the sound you want to produce. So we want to make sure that the tongue is not inhibiting the way the larynx moves and the way the vocal cords ultimately operate. Your tongue's primary job is that of articulation, forming vowels and forming consonants. When we sing, we always sustain the vowel, and so that's where tension often shows up in the tongue. If you want more information about this idea of sustaining vowels and not consonants, make sure to check out my other video on the singer's language. I've got that linked in the description as well. I'm not going to talk too much today about the way the tongue moves when we form consonants, but instead we're going to focus on the vowels, because when we're making a consonant, your tongue is moving. And when a muscle is moving, there's not usually as much tension or potential for tension as there is when we are holding something in place. So when we hold the vowel, the tongue kind of holds a shape, and we want it to hold that shape without tension. And that's sort of the difficult thing. So there are 5 primary vowel sounds: a, e, o, and u. 3 of those sounds are formed by the tongue. The other 2 are formed by your lips. Can you guess which 2 are formed by your lips? It's o and u. O, u. Okay? So it's a, e that are formed by your tongue. Oftentimes, we don't use the tongue to form these vowels. Instead, we let the jaw kind of do it, and that's another way that tension can sort of creep in. So let's just look at the shape of the tongue for these 3 vowels. A is sort of just a neutral shape. A, okay? A, the back of your tongue is going to start to arc up and forward towards your canines. So I'll show you going from A to A. Looks like this. A, A. You can see how the back and the sides of the tongue arc up and forward. And then that movement goes even further as we go to E. A, E, A, E, right? But usually what we would do is, or most of us would do, would be like A, E, E, E. And we try to turn an E vowel into a lip vowel rather than a tongue vowel, which allows for tension in the tongue. So the first thing to kind of get the hang of is, can you shape these 3 vowels with your tongue? A should be relatively easy. It's A and E that are a little trickier. So just practice that first. A, E. And you might do like I'm doing. Put your hand on your jaw or look in a mirror to make sure your jaw is not moving, just the tongue. A, E. I, I. Now, if your mouth is pretty far open, like mine is, that E might sound a little funky. It works better if you're more like I, E, right? But you can't see my tongue as well that way, so I've got my mouth a little bit further open. All right, so first of all, learn the shape of the tongue for these 3 vowel sounds, A, and E. Okay, great. So now you've learned these sort of 3 primary shapes for the vowels that you're going to make. When you are looking at your tongue, when you are sustaining a vowel, so that would be like if you're holding a note for any length of time and you take a look at your tongue, it should be in one of these 3 shapes. If it's not, then you likely have tension that's not necessary. So, the first thing to think about or to know is that a relaxed tongue is not a flat tongue. So, especially on like an ah vowel, it's really tempting to sort of depress the back of the tongue. Ah, ah, right? And you can't see the back of it at all. Even in an ah vowel, the back of the tongue should be slightly lifted, like in a ramp like shape. Ah, ah, and it should be wide and fluffy. Okay, so if you're noticing when you sing on ah, ah, like the back of it's really pushed down, one thing you can try doing is sing on an NG. If you're having a hard time making that sound, say the word sing, sing, sing. Feel how you make that NG and then hold it. Sing. It's like an open mouthed hum. Okay. When you do that, the back of the tongue sort of lifts up, and that can show you, okay, this is closer to the shape that I'm looking for. Nga, nga, nga. And you can go from an NG into an ah and try not to move the back of your tongue too much. You got to do all this with a mirror, you guys. You'll have no idea if you're doing it right if you're not looking in a mirror. So make sure you're looking in a mirror. You can probably tell, like, my eyes are moving. I'm looking at myself in the camera when I'm doing it to make sure my tongue is doing what it needs to be doing. Okay, so that's the first thing to know. A relaxed tongue is not a flat tongue. Make sure the back of your tongue is not pushing down, but is ever so slightly elevated. And as we talked about, as you move toward A and E, the back of the tongue lifts even higher and starts to arc forward. But even when you're in a neutral shape, the back of the tongue should be slightly elevated. Okay, so now let's talk about the sides of the tongue. One thing that happens quite frequently is that the sides of the tongue will sort of bunch in. And you'll see that your tongue looks like a hot dog or something. It's so funny, you guys. I spent, I kid you not, 4 years in front of a mirror trying to get my tongue to stop doing exactly that sort of like side bunching in. Now, when I want to show someone what I mean by that shape, I can't do it anymore. Okay, so I can't actively show you what that looks like, although it might happen accidentally. And if it does, I'll point it out. But you're looking for the sides of your tongue to stay as wide as your canines, right? So again, when I go to A, E, see how wide the sides of my tongue are? They're not squeezing or pinching in toward the center. It happens a lot on an ah. Ah, again, I can't do it on command, but sometimes I still catch myself. The sides will sort of pinch in. So the sides of your tongue should be as wide as your teeth. Not squeezing in. Again, I can't do it on command. Okay, so that's one place that is really common for tension to show up, and you might not even notice it, but look in a mirror and watch yourself for a while, because it might show up in some places and not in others, and see if you notice any squeezing in of the sides of the tongue. If you do, that exercise that we did at the beginning of going through the vowels and letting your tongue sort of roll forward is a great way to start to teach your tongue a different way of moving. I like to think about the sides of my tongue moving toward my canines. I, E. You see how the sides are like E, way up here toward my canines. That's the way I like to think about that. So that's one way that you can start to tackle tongue tension, particularly if it shows up in the form of the sides of your tongue bunching in. Okay, so we talked about the back of the tongue staying ever so slightly elevated. We talked about the sides of the tongue staying wide. And now lastly is the front of the tongue. Now this one I think is the easiest to sort of identify and even correct as long as you're aware of it. And again, all of this in a mirror. The tongue, it's got a mind of its own. It wants to do something. And the sad thing is we don't really want a whole lot of its help. It wants to do more than we need it to do when we're singing. Because again, if you're speaking, your tongue is moving quite a lot. Because when we speak, we're not holding vowel sounds, right? So there's not time for all of that tension to creep in, right? But as we slow things down and stretch out those vowels, the tongue is like, but I want to help. I want to help. It wants to do something. And we're just like, we want to be like, hey, butt out. We don't want you to do anything. So something that happens with the tongue as we're holding vowels is the front of it will do something like this. Like lift up like that. Or you'll see the front of it pull back. Like that. So the front of your tongue should not push against your bottom teeth, but just rest kind of at your bottom teeth when you are sustaining a vowel. All right, so if you look in the mirror and your tongue is doing this, or it's doing this, or whatever, or even sticking out of your mouth. I doubt that many people do. I've not really ever seen anyone do that. But you want it to sort of just rest gently behind your bottom teeth. Right? That's that neutral shape. So if it's wanting to like lift up, one thing I really like to do is to just drop your jaw, lift the front of your tongue up toward your top teeth, and then drop it back down. And then do that quickly. So that you can teach it. Like, for instance, I think sometimes when the tongue gets stuck like this, it's because we used it to make a consonant and then it never like made its way back down. So you kind of teach it like for instance, what I'm doing there is making an L. And so you can kind of teach it like, okay, yeah, lift up to make the L, but make sure you drop back down. La, 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 la. Okay? And again, you don't want any movement in the jaw when you do that. So that's one way to sort of release the front of the tongue if you're dealing with tension there. So now you know what the tongue should look like when it's in a neutral position, what it should look like when it moves toward an A and an E vowel, and the different places in the tongue where tension might show up, and how to start to relieve some of that. One last overall exercise that I really like for reducing tongue tension is to take your tongue and just go all around your mouth with it in one direction 10 times, and then all around your mouth the other direction 10 times. So you go, and then go the other way 10 times. You can even add sound to that. And you might notice there might be a moment as you go up and down in pitch where the tongue wants to kind of pull back or do something. So I can just kind of show you where tension wants to creep in. But ultimately, when you do this exercise, with or without sound, it should really tire your tongue out. And sometimes that's what it takes to get a muscle to relax, is you just want to fatigue it a little bit. So that's another great exercise that you can do to help reduce tongue tension. I hope you guys found that helpful. I have a million other exercises for reducing tongue tension because, like I said, I spent 4 years in front of a mirror trying to get my tongue to stop doing the things it was doing. It's a pesky muscle. It's also a great muscle. It does a lot, right? Without it, you could not speak. So we want the tongue to articulate, but we don't want it to manage air pressure, which is ultimately what it's trying to do, where you get it into like a tense position when you're sustaining a sound. Okay, so if you want more exercises for tongue release, stay tuned for my membership that's coming out soon. And again, I'm going to be giving away a free month of it for people who sign up early. So just be on the lookout for that. When I've got it up and ready, I will let you know, and I will have a link for you. But I've got tons of tongue tension reducing exercises to help you on your singing journey. But in the meantime, I hope these 2 primary ones that I gave you help. And now that you understand how the tongue moves, hopefully you know what to look out for and you can experience the benefit in your singing. Good luck. Happy singing.